Hello, friends. Here I am again. It's Catherine. So I have been on a mega journey and have been through an extremely powerful, magnificent, excruciating journey and spiritual awakening for over 10 years now. And if you get to meet me, you will hear all of my stories, which are incredible stories, sacred stories, which I share with those that I meet in person. And I know that for a while, I've been sort of nudged to thinking about sharing my story. I would say a TV miniseries would do it the best justice. I'm not a writer, so writing a book or book series would be difficult for me. But I am a storyteller, and one practice or method of medicine people and shamans is the gift of healing through telling stories. So I know that out of all my chakras, my most developed chakra is that of my throat. And expression and telling stories is extremely important for me. So it's a cloudy gray day in Paris, France. It's March 31st, 2022. And I've decided to go ahead and tell one of my first stories. It's probably going to be a long video, so this is something you'd want to snuggle up to an evening after work or after a full day where you just want to relax and hear some sacred stories. So I will start off by saying, so I grew up in New York City. My parents are Romanian, from Romania. My mother is Hungarian-Romanian from Transylvania, Brașov to be precise. And my father is from Bucharest, which is the capital, and his family originated from the seaside in Romania, actually. And my parents left Romania in 1969. They had, well, if I were to get into every single story, it would take days, but I'll give a short enough version. So they left Romania during communism period, and they finally made it to America, where my mother really wanted to pursue the golden dream. And so I was born in 1974, 21st of November, 1974, in Manhattan, New York City. And here was this young immigrant couple that was very motivated to achieve a successful career in architecture. My parents actually met, both of them, in architectural school in Bucharest. They had a drive and an ambition to really make it in America. So I was born as an only child, and my parents put me in some of the best schools in New York City to really raise me as comfortably and securely as they knew how. And I grew up in pretty nice conditions, being I always viewed myself as the child of the immigrants. So I did sort of have this feeling of perhaps not belonging as much as maybe my counter schoolmates did. And I'll skip over my whole childhood, but I will get into, because the story today that I want to really share with you is actually how I got into clairvoyance and energy work and energy therapy. So So, just to give you the background, I was raised in New York City in a pretty comfortable lifestyle, and ended up going to Wellesley College in Wellesley, Massachusetts, which is ranked as some of the top schools in America, definitely the top all female undergraduate college program. And after Wellesley, I went back to New York City, and I ended up working in international positions in fashion companies and in publishing companies. My last job, I was working at Vogue magazine in the international advertising department. Now, I could go into so many stories, but let's get back to how I got to Paris, because in Paris is where my spiritual awakening happened. So, the beginning of my career in New York City kind of went as expected for a young graduate in fashion and publishing. And September 11th happened. And September 11th, I had been at Vogue in this junior position for 2 years already. And it was time for me to start progressing in the hierarchy of things. And I kind of maxed out in the position that I was at as an entry level advertising coordinator and assisting the director of international sales for Vogue magazine, dealing with all the international brands. And because I speak French and Italian, it was a perfect position for me to assist the different offices we had in Italy and in France. So I ended up, so September 11th happened, and I wanted to move forward, and it was quite difficult because nobody was hiring. So it turns out that a colleague of mine I used to work at Hamptons Magazine prior to Vogue Magazine. A colleague of mine from Hamptons Magazine had moved to Paris, France to do an MBA, a program in international brand management at ESSEC, which is also ranked top 3 business schools in Paris, in France. So I really felt my parents, so being that my parents are Romanian, Romania is a very Francophile country. And a lot of the socioeconomic class systems are based on the French systems. So when I was younger, I grew up with French culture, first because a lot of my parents' friends who were Romanian moved to France. And actually, my godmother is Romanian who moved to Paris. And every summer, I would go to Europe. My parents would send me to Europe to spend time with my godmother and her children, and I would also go to Romania to my grandma's. So my parents put me in a bilingual French school called Fleming when I was younger, and so I kind of grew up with French culture already. And so coming back to September 11th, this colleague of mine telling me about this program in France, I said, well, now is the perfect time to take some time off, to study, to do something. My mother kept pushing me, do something more. This marketing schmarketing means nothing, and so on and so forth. So I ended up going to Paris to do this MBA program. And all year long, I was studying. It was a program that was very select program where we were only 27 international students that were chosen for the program. And we spent a lot of time together and studying and doing all that stuff. But we also went out on the weekends and partied and socialized and so on and so forth. And right at the end, the last month, so the program was a 9-month program. And in July, I ended up meeting We went out partying one night. Again, I'll spare all the details, although the details are so much fun, but then the video would get too long. I ended up meeting a guy in a nightclub who I ended up marrying shortly a year later, as my visa ran out. And I could no longer, when we met, we hit it off. I actually sensed something was off, but we often ignore those red flags, don't we? I knew something was off in this relationship, but it was also an opportunity for me not to go back to the United States. And we ended up getting married pretty quickly in order for me to have this possibility to stay in France past my student visa. So we got married, and again, I sensed something was wrong, but I just, kind of went forward with things. And again, I'll spare all the details, but we ended up having 2 children together and starting to construct a life. And things, again, I won't get into details here, but things were not okay in our relationship. And what happened is I came from a family or this belief system that when something isn't working, you do everything possible to make it work. Well, my husband at the time had come from a divorced family and had the belief system that you don't suffer in a relationship that's not working. And what happened is, again, this story is too public for me to go into the details of what happened in our marriage. But just to say, what happened is that he actually left. He left. Our children were 2 years old and 5 years old, and he left us. He left. He ran away from what was not working. And what happened was that this was obviously extremely traumatic to me because I was not expecting it. I knew that there were issues, but I was really in the energy of figuring things out. I love to resolve and understand and find solutions. But my husband at the time was not in the same vibration, and he split. And the way in which he split was extremely violent. To my soul and to my existence. And what I explain to people every time I meet someone, I explain this story, is I felt that I was like a vase that was just dropped on the ground and shattered into a million pieces. And that I knew that I was a strong human being, but that vase was shattered into so many pieces, there was absolutely no way that I could pick them all up, and I needed help. And I don't come from a family that is very keen, or culture, let's say, that is very keen on therapy and going to see someone for assistance. But I knew that, so I was 20, no, how old was I at the time? 37, that I wouldn't be able to handle this on my own. So what I ended up doing is I ended up finding a therapist, a psychologist, who's an American here in Paris. And I thought that if this person was speaking my mother tongue, I would be able to express myself better. So I actually went to meet him, and I went into his office, and I felt that I could read him better than I could do his job better than him, and I could read what was going on. And I was like, how is this helping me? So I said, okay, let me give it a second chance. So I went back to the same guy, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. I can sense things and read things much better than him, and this is not helping me at all. So I ended up saying, okay, well, maybe it's a therapist. So I ended up going to a second therapist who was French this time. I thought to myself, well, maybe the French know better. And it turns out that guy was freaking so weird. I felt like he was Frankenstein. And I was like, okay, this is definitely not better than the other guy. So I said, okay, what am I going to do? And now is where things start getting interesting. It's 15 minutes into the video, but things now get interesting because so I had a colleague in my business school whose husband had also left her a few years back, and she was a few years older than me. And when I told her what had happened, I was a complete mess. She was like, okay, why don't you come and visit me in Istanbul? So she's Turkish. And I said, okay, well, I was supposed to go to Turkey a few years prior, actually, actually 8 years prior. And I sensed that, when she's like, okay, well, why don't you come now and visit me? I was like, okay, now it's time to go to Istanbul. All right, so now it's time to go to Istanbul. And she was a wonderful hostess, and she showed me all around, and she took me to the Topkapi Palace and the museums and all the cultural sites and all that sort of touristic stuff. And then she said to me, why don't I take you to the fortune teller? So I said, no, thank you. I don't need to go to a fortune teller. She's like, come on, Kath. Everybody goes to the fortune teller. It's Istanbul and Turkey is like the hub of fortune telling and clairvoyant land. Just do it for fun. Let's go to a cafe. I know a lady who works in a cafe, and she's really not expensive, and just have a reading done. She does it with the Turkish cup, So I was like, okay, well, she insisted so much. I'm like, okay, whatever. Now I ended up, being that I have Romanian culture to me, Romanians are quite sneaky people, and they're survivors, and they have this energy of surviving anything and everything. And so they have a tendency to be quite, they can be quite manipulative. And I grew up knowing this. So when I went to see this clairvoyant lady in the cafe, I really didn't want her to kind of read my face, and because I knew there were people that could read your face and then like take you down a road according to whatever expressions you're making on your face. And I really can't stand the idea of somebody manipulating me, probably because I come from this culture. So I went into this meeting pretending like everything was fine with a big smile on my face. And the lady, first of all, she's Turkish, so she couldn't speak English. And my friend was basically doing the translation. So it started like this. She took her cup. So I drank the coffee. She took her cup. She looked at the bottom of the cup. She turned it upside down. And she said, put your hand on the cup. So I put my hand on the cup. She put her hand on my hand. And then she starts looking up and speaking up to, the spirits or whatever. Now, let me tell you, I had absolutely no experience with any of these things prior. Any sort of metaphysical stuff. I mean, maybe I came across them in my lifetime, but it wasn't something that I was accustomed to or grew up with like consciously. But I could understand and pick up what was, I could sense what was going on. So she was speaking to something above, and I'm like, ooh, what's this? Okay. So she starts speaking to me, and she starts saying she started off saying things that were kind of general, like, I should go back to my notes and actually see it, but something like you're a very something powerful or strong woman, or I don't know. Then and justice is very important to you. And I'm like, okay. Yeah, that's true. I never really thought of it that way, but okay, why not? Now, because she was Turkish and I wasn't able to speak to her, or she couldn't understand what I was saying, there was no dialogue between us. It was only my friend who was just translating what she was saying to me, and then vice versa if necessary. So I wasn't really engaging in conversation with her. So she started saying certain things that were like, okay, why not? Whatever. And then she says to me, you have as she says, you have been suffering, or you are suffering. And in my mind I was like, oh geez, really? Like, of course I'm keeping this to myself, but in my mind I'm just like, why else would I be here if I was happy? Obviously I'm suffering, but it wasn't showing on my face, right? Remember that. So I said, okay. And then she says, since the month of December. And then I was like, wait a second. She says, since the month of December, you've been trying to make yourself better, but you're not okay. And your husband left you in an extremely violent and traumatic manner. And then I was like, oh boy, okay, wait a second. So I start listening. Then she goes on, and I can't tell you the details of everything, but she went on to give all the details of what had been going on in my life. She talked about my children. She talked about there being another woman in the picture, that my husband ran off with another woman who was dark-haired and masculine. Although I didn't understand all these explanations back then, but it was all true. And now, she went into details like, your husband is very, with his shirts and his shoes, very organized, and like little details that not even my friend who was translating for us would know, because certain of people who I tell the story to, I'm like, well, didn't your friend, make up and you tell her all this information or make things up? I'm like, first of all, no. First of all, she was there to help me. But regardless of that, let's say hypothetically she did want to, pull my leg. There was a lot of things that were said that even my friend wouldn't know, right? So it was just info after info after info. And I don't know how long the session was, because, I was in a time warp. But at the end of the session, I was like, oh my God. This is clearly a phenomenon. This is no joke. This is no joke. There are people who have the capacity to receive information, I don't know where from, that is absolutely true. And it blew me away. It literally blew me away to understand that this existed. So I was just fascinated. And this was the beginning of everything for me. So this is my discovery of the phenomenon of clairvoyance. So what happened next was, okay, so, amazing experience, just completely amazed me, baffled me. But I went back to Paris, back to France, back home. And then, I went back to Istanbul a few more times to go to these fortune tellers again, but never did I come across an experience that was so powerful again. I went to the same lady and another lady, but nothing felt as moving to me as that first session. So I was like, okay, fine, whatever. Little did I know this was just the beginning. So what happened later? Months later, I was visiting Miami, and a friend from college had seen that I was in Miami. She's like, oh, I just moved here. Oh my God, let's meet, whatever. So we went up, we went to meet, and we met in this Rosa Mexicana. And we're sitting in front of each other, and she was like, Kath, what happened? Like last time I came to visit you, I brought your daughter, a present for her birthday. And, so I tried to, in a few sentences, to explain what happened. And all of a sudden she stops me and she says, he wasn't your most compatible soulmate anyway. And I'm like, oh, whoa, okay. I totally got what she was saying, but I looked at her and I was like, okay, how do you know that? I already knew what was going on, but my conscious was understanding, but my mental mind had to understand a few things. And she goes, well, they told me. They told me. I'm like, in my mind, I go, they told you? I said to her, who told you? And she replies, she goes, well, the angels, they told me. I said, what? She said, yeah, the angels, they speak to me. Kath, anyone can speak to the angels. And at that time, I'm like, what? No, not everybody can speak to the angels. I go, oh my God, Michelle, don't you realize that you're psychic? I go, what happened to you? When we were in Boston at Wellesley, going out and partying in the nightclubs every weekend, you were not like this. You were not like this. What happened? So she starts telling me that all her life, so her parents were divorced and she went through all sorts of psychology, therapies and all that all sorts of shrinks and all that stuff. But she couldn't have a relationship that lasted more than 1 month with a guy. And she was really fed up with it and very concerned with it. And finally, one day, she ended up going to a past life regression therapy, where all of a sudden she discovers that she has past lives that are affecting her in this life and are blocking her from achieving the relationship that she wants. And again, to make it more brief and shorten the story, she says to me, Kath, you and I have had 3 lives together. And all of a sudden, I'm like, yeah, and I know which lives they are. I just knew it. Through conversations that we had in the past for other things. I said we were together in ancient Egypt, in ancient Rome, and in ancient Greece. I just knew it. I, all of a sudden, started feeling things. And it ended up that she and I ended up getting into a fight, and we got into a lot of conflict because, well, the next following days, I'm like, holy shit, Michelle, you're freaking psychic. Do you realize that you're psychic? That these abilities have opened, and now you have this capacity to ask and answer questions. And I was going bananas. I felt like I was a scientist that had just found gold, and I wanted the lady in Istanbul. I couldn't ask her any questions because, first of all, she was paid for that service, but she didn't even speak English for me to ask, like, what happened? How do you have this capacity? How did it come to you? And so on and so forth. And I was so excited that my friend that I knew from college, who I trusted because she's a friend, would answer me directly and very honestly, right? So I was asking her so many questions. It was bombarding her. She was going nuts. She goes, Kath, come and see my psychic, all right? Stop asking me these questions. I'm like, okay, fair enough. So we went to go see her lady, which I really wasn't interested in going to see. However, I did. And she did a reading for me. And there were some really interesting things that popped up that one of the things she mentioned was that my husband and I were brother and sister in a past life. And I was the brother and he was the sister, and I was always telling him what to do, and that energy was repeated in this lifetime. And she also said to me, why would you want to hold on to a relationship that wasn't romantic in nature? So it didn't really enter fully, but she said it, and then she also told me that I had a twin flame that I wouldn't be with in this lifetime. I didn't even know what a twin flame was at the time. But years later, I understood it as my journey advanced and I learned about all these things. But she said to me, you won't be with him in this lifetime, but go and find him. I'm like, what the heck does that mean, right? After this session, which, I didn't care too much about, she says to me, now you need to work on your energy, on your chakras. And I'm like, what the heck is chakras? Like, no, I don't need my energy. You guys got my reading. I don't need it. And my friend was like, well, actually, tomorrow night I'm going to this event. I'm going to this Reiki event. Why don't you come with me? And I'm like, all right. So universe keeps opening doors in front of me. So I end up going to this event, which was in Florida in the middle of nowhere, in this esoteric boutique. And we enter the place, and there's like this pyramid with a table with lots of crystals on it. And I'm very attracted to crystals, and I was like, oh my God. There was chairs all around the table with the crystals. I went directly to the front, and I just was buzzing. I was just feeling it. And again, mind you, I don't know anything about this stuff. I've never encountered this stuff before, but I was just like lit. And my friend was in the back row, and I'm like, you don't want to come in the front, And she's like, no, I'll stay here. Thank you. I'm like, okay. So when I really like something, I like to be in the front row and really like be able to absorb everything and not miss a word, an instant. So I didn't know anything at this time. And so it was an event with 6 Reiki practitioners. I had no idea what Reiki was. I didn't know what guided meditation was. So there was this, recording of someone speaking in the background, and you sit in your chair, and these 6 people come and they start putting their hands around you. So I'm like, okay. Again, I don't know anything about this, but what do I have to lose? So I sit there, close my eyes, and really I was still a mess from this, my husband leaving me and just shocking me like beyond belief, and close my eyes, and the music was all of a sudden, these emotions started pouring out of me. I started crying. When these people started coming around me, I felt so much love. There was a surge of love around me that it just made me so emotional, and I was just weeping. And I remember, so there were 6 different practitioners that would come around, and the more of them that came to me, like gravitated towards me, I was even more like sentimentally touched. So at one point, a man came to me, and I felt so in Reiki, or this Reiki, they didn't touch. But I felt on my back this like sparkling, like the Eiffel Tower, like sparkles on only one side of my back. And I'm like, what the heck is this? Anyway, it was super like a surge of emotion. And afterwards, I was freezing. When the event ended, we went to go get a coffee, and I was just like freezing. So what happens is often when you have some energetic cleansing movements in you, it can get really cold. I didn't know this at the time. Now I do. So I was like, what the heck was that? In any case, what happened was Michelle and I, as I said earlier, got into a conflict, and I couldn't deal with her anymore. And I was so annoyed because I finally, like I said, I finally found my subject that I could ask a million questions to, but it wasn't worth me being so uncomfortable with someone in exchange, for what she was offering me. I literally I shut that whole relationship down, and I said fuck it. And I said, when I go, as I was going back to Paris, the what came to me was, in order, I know that the keys to my healing, or whatever it was, I had to find a clairvoyant. So by meeting Michelle, who's my own friend, I recognized, because when I met the lady in Istanbul, I said to myself, there can't just be one person in this world who has this capacity, and I happen to stumble across her, and she happens to be doing it for a very fair rate, in a cafe. There's got to be more people like this in the world. And so the universe ended up showing me that one of my own friends had their capacities opened to this clairvoyance and mediumship. And so it gave me the example that more people like this existed. And so as I went back, leaving Miami, going back to Paris, I said to myself, I need to find someone who's clairvoyant in Paris and Reiki people, because I know my answers will be in clairvoyance and in Reiki. And so I was right. So what ended up happening is I went back to Paris. I started typing, on meetup.com. I ended up finding all these different events, and I met Marie, who's a clairvoyant. She's actually Norwegian, mixed Canadian, I think. A younger woman who's clairvoyant, and I went to go see her and got messages channeled to me through her. Then I ended up meeting all sorts of people who were doing energy work. And I didn't know what this stuff was in the beginning. I really didn't know what it was, but universe really, so when I was living my married life, I was living as a foreigner, an American in Paris. I was basically inserted into his life and his lifestyle with his friends. And when our marriage exploded, I found myself with everything that I had grown accustomed to for those eight years that we were together, just flew out the window. It was like the rug was just, taken from under my feet. And it was really traumatizing. And he ended up moving to Brussels, and I remained in Paris. And I had these two little adorable girls who are 2 and 5 years old, and trying to maintain some sort of sanity and structure to raise them was so challenging. But I get emotional just even thinking about it. But what happened is, the weekends that I didn't have my kids, I had not much to do because I had no more friends, and I had no more I didn't have my routines anymore. I had nothing. Everything was taken away like that. So I ended up, since I had no one to see and nowhere to go, I ended up going to all these different events regarding spirituality and Reiki and mediumship and all this sort of stuff. And this was the beginning of everything for me. So I'm going to stop now because I could go on for hours. I will continue perhaps on a second video if you're interested in hearing part 2. But what I do want to close this with is this idea of introducing clairvoyance as a means of a real phenomenon that people have, and I'll probably evolve it in more videos to come if I feel moved to continue this series. But I really do want to mention that um, clairvoyance, mediumship is a totally real thing, and it is a part of my life now. And it's a tool that has assisted me to heal in so many different ways. And I just wanted to share my first experience with clairvoyance, and I will continue the rest perhaps another day. I hope you enjoyed my story so far, and stay tuned if there'll be another part that interests you. We'll keep going. Leave some comments if you're interested in knowing what happened next. All right, take care. Bye.